My husband David and I pulled up to the venue where my sister Sarah's wedding was about to take place. The envelope with $10,000 was tucked safely in David's jacket pocket, our wedding gift to Sarah. On top of that, we'd already covered about a third of the wedding expenses. It was a lot of money, but David's investment banking job and my position as a marketing director meant we could afford it. Plus, Sarah was my only sister. I tugged at the hem of my dress, feeling a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. The weight of family expectations always seemed to hang heavier on me than on Sarah. You okay, Ellen? David asked, his hand warm on mine. Fine, I said, forcing a smile. Just wedding jitters. Not even mine, and I'm nervous. As we walked in, I spotted my parents immediately. Mom was fussing with Dad's tie while he pretended to be annoyed, but I could see the smile playing at his lips. They looked radiant. That was the only word for it. Mom's face was practically glowing with happiness, and Dad looked 10 years younger. Something twisted in my gut. I couldn't remember them looking this happy at my wedding 5 years ago. They'd been pleasant enough, sure, but not like this, not bursting with pride and joy. Look at them, I whispered to David. Have you ever seen them so happy? David squeezed my hand but said nothing. He knew the complicated history with my parents all too well. I quickly pushed the thought away. This wasn't the time to drag up old feelings. Today was about Sarah, and I was determined to be the supportive big sister I'd always been. The ceremony went perfectly. Sarah looked stunning in her dress, and her fiancé, now husband, Brian, couldn't take his eyes off her. I sat between my parents and David, trying to focus on the happiness of the day rather than the nagging feeling that my parents' reactions were somehow different than they had been at my wedding. Isn't she beautiful? My mother whispered, tears in her eyes. She is, I agreed, swallowing the lump in my throat. After the ceremony came the reception. We ate, drank, danced, and then it was time for the speeches. First, the best man, then the maid of honor, and finally, my parents stood up together. Mom tapped her glass gently. We want to thank everyone for coming today to celebrate our beloved daughter's wedding. There was something about the way she emphasized beloved that made me shift uncomfortably in my seat. David must have noticed because he placed his hand over mine. Dad continued, watching Sarah grow into the beautiful woman she is today has been the greatest joy of our lives. She's always been special, always brought so much light into our home. I smiled and nodded, wondering if I was just being oversensitive. Of course, they loved Sarah. They loved both of us. Then Mom reached into her purse and pulled out some papers. Brian, Sarah, your father and I wanted to give you something to start your new life together, something special. She held up the papers for everyone to see. We're giving you our family home as a wedding present. The room erupted in gasps, followed by thunderous applause. I froze. Beside me, David went rigid. I stared at my parents, then at Sarah, waiting for someone to laugh and say it was a joke, but it wasn't. My parents were beaming proudly, and Sarah didn't look surprised at all. She was crying happy tears, hugging Brian, who was staring at my parents with his mouth hanging open. The house, my parents' house, the house with the mortgage I'd been paying for the last 5 years because my parents couldn't afford it anymore after Dad's hours got cut and Mom's arthritis made it hard for her to work full time. I managed to plaster a smile on my face, but inside I was screaming. Not once had they mentioned giving the house to Sarah. They hadn't even asked me, and I was the one paying for it. Ellen, you okay? David whispered, his face tight with concern. Fine, I said through my teeth, still smiling as Sarah and Brian made their way to the front to hug my parents. My throat felt tight, like I was swallowing glass, but I kept that smile fixed in place. An hour later, I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of the betrayal pressed down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I found David by the bar. Can we leave? I asked quietly. He took one look at my face and nodded. I'll get our coats. We made our excuses. David had an early meeting. We were so sorry. Such a beautiful wedding. Congratulations again, and left before anyone could protest too much. The second we got in the car, I burst into tears. I can't believe they did that. I sobbed as David started the engine. I've been paying that mortgage for 5 years, and they didn't even tell me they were planning this. I know, David said grimly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. It's unbelievable. And Sarah knew. Did you see her face? She wasn't surprised at all. I wiped my eyes angrily. This isn't about the money. I don't care about the money, but they could have talked to me first. Of course it's not about the money, David said softly. It's about respect, common decency. Something your parents seem to be lacking when it comes to you. The drive home, as we drove home, memories kept flooding back. All the times my parents had shown clear favoritism towards Sarah. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring through my tears. Remember when I graduated college, and they gave me a card with $50, but when Sarah graduated 2 years later, they bought her a car? My voice cracked with the pain of the memory. David nodded, his jaw tight. That wasn't right. Or my 21st birthday dinner that they skipped because Sarah had a volleyball game, I continued, the words tumbling out now. A game, not even a championship or anything important. I remember, David said quietly. You tried not to show it, but I could tell how much it hurt you. The more I talked, the more examples I remembered. Each time Sarah got what she wanted while I got overlooked or forgotten. How my parents attended all of Sarah's events but found excuses to miss mine. How they bragged about Sarah's accomplishments but barely mentioned mine. It's like I've been invisible all these years, I said, staring at my hands. No matter what I do, it's never enough. I paid for their house, David. Their house. And they just gave it away, without even talking to me. By the time we got home, I was exhausted from crying and talking. My head pounded, and my eyes felt swollen and raw. Where are your parents going to live now? David asked as we got ready for bed. If they're giving the house to Sarah and Brian. I shrugged, pulling on my pajamas. I have no idea. That's not my problem anymore. I turned off the light and rolled over, trying to ignore the ache in my chest. But even in the darkness, I couldn't escape the feeling of betrayal that washed over me in waves. 3 weeks later, for the next 3 weeks, I went to work, came home, and tried not to think about the wedding or the house or any of it. I buried myself in marketing reports and budget meetings, putting on a brave face for my team while feeling hollow inside. Then one evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. Against my better judgment, I answered. Ellen, honey, Mom said as if nothing had happened, her voice light and casual. We're having a family dinner this weekend. Your sister and Brian are back from their honeymoon, and we'd love for you and David to join us. I sat frozen, staring at the wall. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to ask how she could possibly act like everything was normal. Instead, I gripped the phone tighter. Ellen? Are you there? Mom prompted. I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up, but some part of me, probably the stupid, hopeful part, wondered if maybe they'd apologize, maybe they'd explain. Fine, I said flatly. We'll be there. Wonderful. Mom chirped. Saturday at 6. See you then. I hung up and sat motionless, feeling the familiar weight of obligation settle on my shoulders. When David came home, I told him about the dinner. His expression darkened. Are you sure you want to go? He asked carefully. After everything? No, I admitted. But I need to know what they're thinking. How they could do this. David sat beside me on the couch, taking my hand in his. Just remember, you don't owe them anything. Not anymore. The family dinner, Saturday, arrived too quickly. When we pulled up, I noticed Sarah's car in the driveway along with my parents' old sedan. We walked up to the front door, and I hesitated before ringing the bell. It felt weird not using my key, but this wasn't my parents' house anymore. It was Sarah and Brian's. Ready? David asked, his hand warm and steady on my back. I took a deep breath, as I'll ever be. Mom answered, all smiles. Ellen, David, come in, come in. She hugged me like nothing had happened, like she hadn't given away the house I'd been paying for without even talking to me about it. I hugged her back stiffly, catching the familiar scent of her perfume that once meant comfort, but now just made my stomach clench. Dad was in the living room with Brian watching a game. He stood up when we entered, giving David a firm handshake and me a quick hug. "Where's Sarah?" I asked, noticing her absence, trying to keep my voice neutral even as I felt like an outsider in the home I financially supported for years. "Oh, she's changing the curtains in the dining room," Mom said casually. "She's been redecorating all week." My blood boiled at that. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since the wedding, and Sarah was already changing things around like she owned the place for years. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. We walked through to the dining room, and there she was, my sister, standing on a stepladder, hanging new cream-colored curtains in place of Mom's old blue ones. "Ellen," she exclaimed, climbing down to hug me. "Isn't this place great? We're going to redo the kitchen next." I forced a smile that felt like broken glass. "Great." At the dinner table, "Dinner's ready," Mom announced. "Everyone sit down." We took our seats, me between David and Dad, with Mom and Sarah across from us and Brian at the end of the table. The food looked good, Mom's special pot roast with all the trimmings, but I had no appetite. The first 10 minutes were filled with Sarah and Brian describing their honeymoon in Hawaii in excruciating detail. "The water was so blue, you wouldn't believe it," Sarah gushed, her hands animated as she spoke. "And our hotel suite had this amazing view of the ocean." I picked at my food and nodded occasionally while David asked appropriate questions to keep the conversation going. Every time Sarah mentioned a luxury they'd enjoyed, I couldn't help thinking about how my financial support of our parents had freed up Sarah to enjoy her carefree life. "The spa treatments were divine," Sarah continued, not noticing my silence. "Brian even got a massage, didn't you, honey?" "Sure did," Brian agreed, looking uncomfortable for the first time. Maybe he was starting to sense the tension. Finally, when Sarah paused to take a breath, Mom cleared her throat. "So, we wanted to talk to you about something, Ellen," she said. "Well, as you know, we've given the house to Sarah and Brian as their wedding present." "Yes, I noticed," I said flatly, setting down my fork with a deliberate clink against the plate. Mom continued as if she hadn't heard the edge of my voice. "The thing is, they're a young couple starting their life together. They need their own space." I remained silent, waiting for her to get to the point. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "What your mother is trying to say," he said, "is that we can't live here with them. They need privacy." I felt David's hand on my knee under the table, a silent gesture of support. "I see," I said, still not sure where this was going. "So, where are you planning to live?" Mom and Dad exchanged another look. I noticed Sarah suddenly became very interested in her mashed potatoes, pushing them around her plate and avoiding my eyes. "Well," Mom said slowly, "we've been thinking about it, and we've decided we're going to move to your vacation home. It's the perfect size for us, and it's in a nice, quiet area." I set down my fork and knife carefully, a strange calm settling over me despite the blood rushing in my ears. The vacation home they were referring to as a small cottage I'd bought with my own money before I even met David. I'd saved for years to afford it, working overtime and weekends, sacrificing vacations and new clothes and dinners out. It was my special place, somewhere I could go to escape the city, and occasionally I let my parents use it when they wanted a weekend away. "Let me get this straight," I said, keeping my voice level. "You gave your house, the house I've been paying a mortgage on for 5 years, to Sarah, and now you think you're going to move into my vacation home without even asking me first?" "Ellen," Dad said, frowning, "be reasonable. Where else are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," I said, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. "You had a house. You gave it away without consulting me, even though I've been paying for it, and now you expect me to just hand over my vacation home to you?" "It's not like you use it that much," Sarah chimed in, her voice high and defensive. I turned to her, unable to hide my anger now. "Are you serious right now? It's my property. I bought it with my money. I get to decide who uses it and when." Mom's face had gone pale. "You can't mean you're saying no, are you?" Her voice trembled, and I saw the hint of tears in her eyes, the same tears that had always made me back down in the past. "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied, surprised by my own firmness. "No, you are not moving into my vacation home, not now, not ever." The table fell silent. Then Mom's face crumpled. "How can you do this to us?" she cried. "After everything we've done for you. We're your parents." I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my throat. "Yes, and as my parents, you might have thought to discuss this with me before giving away a house I was paying for and deciding to take over my property. You don't have the right to refuse us," Mom said, her voice rising. "We have nowhere else to go now." "You actually have your house," I pointed out, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside. "The one I've been paying the mortgage on for 5 years, but you gave it to Sarah, so now it's your problem to figure out where to live." Sarah slammed her hand on the table. "God, you're so cruel and greedy. You've always been jealous of me because Mom and Dad love me more. You've always been envious of our relationship." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, stunned by her outburst and the raw truth it revealed. Then I turned to her, suddenly calm. "If Mom and Dad love you so much, and you love them so much, then why don't you let them live here with you? This is a 4-bedroom house, plenty of room." Sarah's mouth snapped shut. She looked away, suddenly finding her plate fascinating again. That's that's not the point," she mumbled. "Brian and I need our privacy. And I need my vacation home," I counted. "Sounds like we both have needs." My parents started talking over each other, telling me how wrong I was, how disappointing, how selfish. I stopped listening. I stood up and picked up my purse. "David, I think we're done here." David nodded, standing up immediately. As we walked to the door, I heard my mother's sobs and my father's angry muttering, but for the first time in my life, I didn't turn back. I didn't try to fix it. I walked out the door with my head held high, feeling both terrible and strangely free. The aftermath. The next day, my phone exploded with messages and calls from my parents and Sarah. I ignored them all, feeling a mixture of guilt and righteous anger as the notifications kept appearing. Some called me selfish. Some begged me to reconsider. Some tried to guilt trip me with reminders of everything they'd supposedly done for me over the years. "Your mother is devastated, Ellen. How could you do this to her?" Read one text from my father. "I can't believe my own daughter would leave us homeless," said a voicemail from Mom, her voice quavering dramatically. "You've always been so bitter and jealous. Get over yourself." Sarah had written. I showed some of the messages to David, who shook his head in disbelief as we sat at our kitchen counter Sunday morning, coffee mugs in hand. "I think I need to block them for a while," I said, feeling a headache forming behind my eyes. "I can't keep reading these. It's like they're living in a completely different reality." "Do what you need to do," David said, kissing the top of my head. "Take care of yourself first. They're adults. They'll figure it out." So I did. I blocked their numbers and social media accounts, at least temporarily. I needed space to think, to process everything that had happened. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for years seemed a little lighter, even as guilt tried to creep back in. 2 weeks passed in blissful silence. No calls, no texts, no family drama. David and I fell back into our normal routine: work, home, occasional dinners with friends who didn't try to steal my property. It was nice, peaceful even. For the first time in years, I didn't feel that constant anxiety, that need to please everyone at my own expense. The security alert. I was at my desk reviewing a marketing campaign when my phone buzzed with an alert. I glanced down and felt my stomach drop. It was a notification from the security system at my vacation home. Motion detected, front door opened. I quickly checked the app. Someone had used a key to unlock the front door, but hadn't disabled the alarm system. The security company would be calling me any second to verify if this was authorized entry. "No," I whispered, staring at the alert. They wouldn't, but I knew they would. The entitlement, the assumption that what was mine was theirs to take. It was exactly what they would do. Sure enough, my phone rang almost immediately. "Miss Wilson, this is Safeguard Security. We've detected entry at your property on Pine Ridge Road. Is this authorized?" "No," I said firmly, my hand gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. "I'm not there, and no one has permission to be there. Please send the police immediately." My heart hammered in my chest as I called David. "They're at the vacation home. I said when he answered. They're trying to move in anyway. Jesus, David muttered. I'm coming to get you. We'll drive up there together. An hour later, my phone rang. It was an officer from the local police department. Miss Wilson, this is Officer Reyes. We're at your property on Pine Ridge Road. We have two individuals here who claim to be your parents. They have keys to the property but admitted they don't have permission to be here. I closed my eyes, confirming my suspicions. Yes, they are my parents, but they absolutely do not have permission to be in my house. I understand. How would you like us to proceed? We can remove them from the property, but since they used a key rather than forced entry, it's a bit of a gray area for charges. I rubbed my temple, feeling the headache intensify. I'll come up there, I decided. My husband and I can drive up now. We're about an hour away. We'll wait for you, the officer assured me. The drive was tense. I alternated between anger and disbelief, staring out the window at the passing landscape but seeing nothing. How could they do this? I asked, breaking the silence. After I explicitly told them no, they tried to move in anyway. Who does that? People who've never heard the word no before, David replied quietly, his hands steady on the wheel. When we pulled up to my vacation home, there was a police cruiser in the driveway. Two officers were standing outside, and sitting on the front porch steps were my parents, looking miserable. Several suitcases and boxes were piled beside them. My father stood up when he saw us, his face a mixture of relief and indignation. Ellen, thank God you're here. He called out. Tell these officers there's been a misunderstanding. I got out of the car and approached the officers, ignoring my parents for the moment. My legs felt shaky, but I kept my voice steady. Thank you for responding so quickly. These are indeed my parents, but they do not have permission to be here. One of the officers nodded. Ma'am, do you want to press charges for trespassing? My mother gasped. Ellen, you wouldn't. I turned to look at her. She seemed smaller somehow, her face pale and drawn, but the familiar manipulative expression was still there in her eyes. You broke into my house after I specifically told you no. What did you think would happen? We didn't break in, my father protested, his voice rising. We used the key you gave us. For emergencies, I reminded him. Not to move in against my explicit wishes. This is all your fault, my mother suddenly shouted, standing up. Her voice cracked with emotion, and I saw real tears now, not the calculated ones she usually deployed. If you had just let us stay here like we planned, none of this would have happened. We wouldn't be standing here being treated like criminals. I stared at her, shocked by the outburst. My fault? You gave away a house I was paying the mortgage on without consulting me, then tried to take over my property without permission, and somehow this is my fault? You're so arrogant, Mom continued, ignoring my point, her face flushing with anger. So irresponsible. We raised you better than this. We gave you everything. Mom, stop, I said, my voice low. You're embarrassing yourself. You and Dad just tried to break into my house to move in after I explicitly told you no. And now you're standing here in front of police officers yelling at me about how I'm being irresponsible. That seemed to get through to her. She abruptly closed her mouth, but her eyes were still full of indignation. I turned back to the officers. I'd like a word in private, please. Private discussion with the officers. We stepped away from my parents and David. I don't want to press charges against them, I said quietly. They're still my parents, even if they're being absolutely ridiculous right now, but I can't have them staying here either. The officer nodded. We understand. Family situations can be complicated. He glanced over at my parents, who were whispering urgently to each other. We can take them to the station for a few hours, give them a stern warning about trespassing, then release them. Sometimes a few hours in a holding cell can be a good reality check. I considered this. The thought of my parents in a police station was unsettling, but maybe it was the wake-up call they needed. Yes, please do that, the younger officer added. They've got quite a bit of property with them. What would you like us to do about that? I sighed, looking at the pile of suitcases and boxes. Another problem to solve. I'll arrange for it to be stored somewhere safe. I walked back to where my parents were sitting. The fear in my mother's eyes was real now, and for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy. But I remembered all those years of putting them first, of being overlooked, of paying their mortgage while they favored Sarah. The officers are going to take you to the police station for a few hours, I said, keeping my voice calm and matter of fact. I'm not pressing charges, but I want you to understand how serious this is. You cannot just move into someone's house without permission, even if you're family. Ellen, please. My mother pleaded, reaching for my hand. We have nowhere else to go. I stepped back slightly, avoiding her touch. You should have thought of that before giving away your house. I'll make sure your belongings are stored safely until you figure out where you're going to live. My father stood up, his face red with anger. This is how you treat your parents? After everything we've done for you? I looked at him steadily. What exactly have you done for me, Dad? Can you name one thing you've done for me in the last 5 years that wasn't actually me doing something for you? He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to answer. The car with the police and my parents left while we waited for the locksmith. David made some calls and arranged for my parents' belongings to be taken to a nearby storage facility. I paid for 1 month and texted the details to my sister since my parents' numbers were still blocked. You doing okay? David asked, putting his arm around me as we stood watching the storage company load the last of my parents' things. Not really, I admitted. But I will be. The locksmith arrived and changed all the locks. By the time we left, the house was secure again. On the drive home, I felt drained but also strangely liberated. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up to my parents' manipulation and refused to be taken advantage of. What do you think they'll do now? David asked as we neared our apartment. Probably go crying to Sarah, I guessed, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood come into view. She can deal with them. She got the house. She can take the responsibility that comes with it. David reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, you know. That couldn't have been easy. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over, though. Knowing my mother, she would find a way to make me look like the villain in all this. She always did. The social media battle, I was right. A week later, I opened Facebook to find a long, dramatic post from my mother. It had already gathered dozens of sympathetic comments from relatives and family friends. Today, I learned what it means to be abandoned by your own child, it began. My husband and I, in our golden years, have been cast out like unwanted pets. Our eldest daughter, Ellen, had the police remove us from her vacation home like common criminals, leaving us with nowhere to go. The post went on, conveniently leaving out the fact that they had given their house to Sarah, that I had been paying their mortgage for years, and that they had tried to move into my vacation home against my explicit refusal. We are staying in a motel now, the post continued, struggling to make ends meet while our daughter enjoys her comfortable life, refusing to help the very parents who sacrificed everything for her. As I scrolled through the comments, people calling me heartless, cruel, ungrateful, something inside me snapped. I'd spent my whole life being the good daughter, the responsible one, taking care of everyone else's needs. And this was how they portrayed me. I can't believe this, I said to David, showing him the post. She's completely twisting everything. David's face darkened as he read. This is manipulative and dishonest. I think it's time you told your side. I started typing my own post in response. It was time for everyone to hear the whole truth. I've stayed silent about family matters until now, but since my mother has chosen to make our private issues public, I feel I need to share my side of the story. Here are the facts that were conveniently left out of my mother's post. For the past 5 years, I have been paying the mortgage on my parents' house because they couldn't afford it due to health issues and reduced work hours. I did this willingly because they're my family, and they needed help. 3 weeks ago, at my sister Sarah's wedding, which I also helped pay for, my parents announced they were giving their house, the one I'd been paying for, to my sister as a wedding gift. They did this without consulting me or even giving me a heads up. When I finally spoke to them after the wedding, they informed me that they had planned to move into my vacation home, again without asking me first. They had apparently worked this all out with my sister before her wedding. She would get their house, they would take my vacation property. When I refused to let them move into my vacation home, they attempted to move in anyway. They used a spare key I had given them for emergencies and triggered the security system. That's why the police were involved. I didn't have them arrested, despite what my mother's post suggests. I did have the police remove them from my property because they were trespassing. I then paid for a storage unit for their belongings. If my parents need a place to stay, perhaps they should ask my sister, who now owns a 4-bedroom house thanks to them and me, since I paid for it. I added a final paragraph. I've always done my best to help my family, but I won't be taken advantage of or painted as a villain for refusing to give up my property after already paying for theirs. Family goes both ways. It's about mutual respect, not just taking whatever you want because we're family. I hit post before I could second guess myself. David read it over my shoulder and gave me a thumbs up. The response was immediate. Comments started rolling in from cousins, aunts, uncles, even some of my parents' friends. But unlike the comments on my mother's post, these were supportive. I had no idea you were paying their mortgage. That's so unfair of them. Wait, they gave away a house you were paying for? That's crazy. You did the right thing, Ellen. It's time someone stood up to them. I should have felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. This whole situation was exhausting, and broadcasting it publicly didn't exactly feel great, even if I was just defending myself. That 2 days later, my cousin Jessica called me. Hey, I wanted to check on you, she said. Your parents tried to go back to their house. I mean Sarah's house now, but she wouldn't let them in. I sat up straighter, surprised despite myself. Seriously? Yeah, apparently she told them it's her house now and there's no room for them. They're staying in some crappy apartment now, and your mom had to go back to working full-time to afford the rent. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me thought they deserved it. This is the situation they had created for themselves, but another part of me still felt a pang of sympathy. They were still my parents, even if they had treated me unfairly. Thanks for letting me know, I said. How did you find out? Your mom called my mom crying about it, Jessica explained. But even my mom thinks they were wrong this time. She said she always knew they favored Sarah, but this was beyond the pale. After we hung up, I told David what Jessica had said. It's just karma, he remarked, stirring pasta sauce at the stove. Yeah, I agreed, leaning against the counter. But I don't feel as satisfied as I thought I would. David set down the spoon and turned to me, his eyes gentle. That's because you're a good person, Ellen, unlike some people we could mention. It's okay to still care about them, even after everything they've done. Over the next few weeks, my parents tried to contact me several times. I saw their names on my phone, but couldn't bring myself to answer. I wasn't ready. The hurt was still too fresh, the betrayal too raw. One night as David and I were getting ready for bed, he asked me, "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" I paused, toothbrush in hand, considering the question. Maybe someday, not for their sake, but for mine. Carrying around all this anger isn't healthy. I rinsed my mouth before continuing. And Sarah? That's more complicated. She knew what they were planning. She was part of it, and then she turned them away when they needed her. At least you know where you stand now, David said, pulling me close. No more illusions about who's important to them and who isn't. He was right. As painful as this whole experience had been, it had torn away the pretense. I'd spent years trying to win my parents' approval, trying to be as special as Sarah was to them. Now I knew that was never going to happen, and strangely, that knowledge was freeing. Epilogue. The next morning, I saw another call from my mother. This time, I let it go to voicemail. After a minute, I listened to the message. Ellen, her voice was different now, smaller, less demanding. We made a mistake, a big one. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but please call us back. We need to talk. I deleted the message without calling back. Maybe someday I'd be ready to hear their apology if that's what they were offering. Maybe someday I'd be ready to have them back in my life on new terms, with clear boundaries, but not today. Today, I was still learning how to put myself first, something I should have done a long time ago. As for my vacation home, I decided to list it for rent. The extra income would be nice, and I liked the idea of the place being used and enjoyed rather than sitting empty as a reminder of everything that had happened. I'd find a new special place, one without the weight of painful memories. David came into the kitchen as I was making coffee, wrapping his arms around me from behind. You okay? He asked, resting his chin on my shoulder. I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I actually am. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe. And it was true. The weight that had pressed on my chest for years was finally lifting. I had stood up for myself, set boundaries, and chosen my own well being. It wasn't perfect, and the hurt wasn't gone, but I was on my way to something better, a life defined by my own choices, not by endless obligation and unappreciated sacrifice. I turned in David's arms and kissed him. Thank you for being there for me through all of this. Always, he promised, and I believed him.